desert sun was merciless, and the Apache tribe was dying of thirst. 4 weeks, not a single drop of water had been found. Horses collapsed. Children cried through the night. Even the warriors had begun to lose hope. Then a lone cowboy appeared out of nowhere. Dust-covered, exhausted, and carrying a secret that would change everything. What he discovered deep in the canyon saved the entire tribe from disaster. But what happened next shocked even him. That night, the Apache chief gathered the whole camp, lined up 22 women in front of the cowboy, and made an offer no outsider had ever received before. But the cowboy's response left the tribe completely speechless. Watch until the end to discover the unbelievable decision that changed both their lives forever. The sun burned over the desert like a giant flame hanging in the sky. Day after day, the land grew drier. Cracks spread across the earth. Rivers disappeared into mud. Even the wind carried heat that stung the skin and filled the air with dust. The Apache tribe had been fighting the drought for many weeks. Their horses were weak. Hunters returned with little food. Mothers used small cups to divide the last water among their children. Every morning, Chief Dakota climbed a rocky hill above the camp and searched the empty horizon. He was a strong leader with sharp eyes and years of wisdom, but even he could not bring rain from the sky. One afternoon, a young scout came running through the camp. "A rider is coming," he shouted. The camp became silent at once. Warriors reached for their rifles and bows. Women pulled children closer. Outsiders rarely entered Apache land alone. Those who did were often desperate or dangerous. Far in the distance, a single cowboy rode slowly through the dust. His horse stumbled with every step. The man looked barely alive. When he finally reached the edge of the camp, he raised both hands. "I do not want trouble," he said in a dry voice. The warriors surrounded him immediately. Chief Dakota stepped forward and studied the stranger carefully. The cowboy looked tired, hungry, and badly dehydrated. Dust covered his clothes and face. His lips were cracked from thirst. "What brings you here?" Dakota asked. The cowboy swallowed hard before answering. "Water." The tribe exchanged uneasy looks. The man slowly climbed down from his horse, but his legs gave out beneath him. Before he hit the ground, an older Apache woman rushed forward and caught him. Even during hard times, the tribe respected human life. The cowboy opened his eyes again after a moment. "My name is Elijah Reed," he whispered. Dakota remained cautious. "Why should we trust you?" Elijah looked around the camp. He saw the tired faces, the weak animals, and the empty water barrels sitting near the fires. "Because I know what drought does to people," he answered quietly. Something in his voice sounded honest. Dakota ordered the warriors to lower their weapons. For the next 2 days, Elijah stayed in the camp recovering his strength. Some members of the tribe still watched him with suspicion, especially the younger warriors. Others became curious about the stranger who had crossed the desert alone. Elijah noticed that despite their suffering, the Apache people still cared for one another. An elderly man shared food with a hungry child before eating himself. Women carried water for injured horses. Families sat together at night telling stories beside weak fires. The kindness reminded Elijah of his own family long ago before drought and sickness destroyed their ranch in Texas. On the 3rd morning, Elijah overheard several warriors speaking near the edge of camp. "The sacred spring is gone," one said bitterly. "There is no hope left." Elijah stepped closer. "What spring?" he asked. The warriors became quiet at once. Chief Dakota appeared behind them. "It is not your concern," the chief said firmly. But Elijah had spent years traveling through dry land as a cattle driver. He understood deserts better than most men. "There is always water somewhere," Elijah replied. One warrior shook his head angrily. "You do not understand this land." "Maybe not," Elijah admitted. "But let me take a look." Dakota studied him for several long moments. The chief could see determination in the cowboy's eyes. Finally, he nodded once. "If you waste our time, you will leave immediately." Elijah agreed. That afternoon, Chief Dakota led the cowboy deep into the canyon where the tribe's sacred spring had once flowed. And neither man knew that this journey would soon change both their lives forever. The canyon walls rose high above Elijah and Chief Dakota as they walked deeper into the narrow passage. Heat pressed down from every direction. The dry ground crunched beneath their boots and moccasins. 2 Apache warriors followed behind them in silence. After nearly an hour, Dakota stopped beside a wide stone basin surrounded by rocks. "This is the sacred spring," the chief said. Elijah stared at it quietly. The basin was completely dry. Small cracks covered the stone where water once flowed. Dead plants lay scattered nearby. It looked as though the spring had vanished long ago. One of the warriors crossed his arms. "You came all this way for nothing, cowboy." But Elijah did not answer immediately. Instead, he knelt near the edge of the basin and pressed his hand against the ground. The dirt felt cooler than the rest of the canyon. That caught his attention. Slowly, he stood and studied the canyon walls. Years of traveling through deserts had taught him something important. Water often left signs behind, even when it could no longer be seen. He moved toward a shadowed section of rock. Then he noticed it. A thin patch of green moss hidden between cracks in the stone. Elijah stepped closer. "There is still moisture here," he said softly. The warriors exchanged doubtful looks. Dakota watched carefully. Elijah placed his ear against the rock wall for a moment. At first he heard nothing except the wind moving through the canyon. Then came a faint sound, a weak rushing noise beneath the stone. His eyes widened slightly. "The water is still down there," Elijah said. One warrior laughed bitterly. "If water exists, then where is it?" Elijah pointed toward a large pile of fallen rocks higher up the canyon. That rockslide blocked the underground flow. Dakota walked toward the fallen stones and studied them closely. Some of the rocks looked newer than the surrounding canyon walls. The chief turned back toward Elijah. "You believe removing these rocks will bring back the spring?" "I think it is worth trying." The warriors looked uncertain. The tribe was already weak from hunger and thirst. Digging under the desert heat would not be easy. Dakota remained silent for a long moment before finally speaking. "We begin tomorrow morning." Before sunrise the next day, nearly 20 members of the tribe gathered in the canyon with tools, ropes, and wooden poles. Elijah worked beside them from the beginning. Large stones were rolled away one by one. Dust filled the air with every strike against the rocks. Sweat poured down faces before the sun fully rose above the canyon walls. Hours passed. The heat became unbearable. Some of the younger warriors began losing patience. "There is nothing here," one complained. Another threw his shovel aside. "We are wasting strength we do not have." But Elijah refused to stop. He continued clearing smaller rocks near the moss-covered wall. His hands bled from the rough stone, but he ignored the pain. Dakota noticed the cowboy never asked anyone else to work harder than he did himself. That earned the chief's respect. Late in the afternoon, Elijah uncovered a narrow crack beneath the rocks. Cool air drifted out from inside it. He quickly dropped to his knees. "Help me clear this section," he shouted. The workers rushed over. Together they pushed against a heavy stone wedged deep inside the crack. At first it would not move. Then suddenly the rock shifted. A deep rumble echoed through the canyon. Everyone jumped back as several smaller stones collapsed inward. For one long second, nothing happened. Then a loud burst exploded from beneath the rocks. Water shot through the opening with incredible force. The stream slammed into the dry basin and spread across the canyon floor. For a moment nobody moved. Then the tribe erupted with cries of joy. Children laughed and ran toward the water. Warriors dropped to their knees beside the stream. Some people cried openly as they splashed cool water onto their faces. Chief Dakota stood frozen in disbelief. Months of suffering had ended in a single moment. Elijah stepped back quietly, soaked from head to toe. The chief slowly approached him. "You saved my people," Dakota said. Elijah shook his head gently. "No," he replied. "Your people saved themselves. I only helped find the way." For the first time since the drought began, hope returned to the Apache camp. That night the Apache camp felt alive again. Fires burned across the valley while fresh water flowed through the restored spring nearby. Children laughed as they carried full buckets back to their families. The sound of drums echoed between the canyon walls for the first time in many months. The drought no longer felt endless. Elijah sat quietly near one of the fires, watching the celebration around him. Part of him still could not believe the water had returned. Another part felt strange seeing the tribe treat him like a hero. An older man handed him roasted meat with a grateful smile. A woman placed a warm blanket beside him. Everywhere he looked, people nodded to him with respect. Elijah was not used to kindness from strangers. As the night grew darker, a young Apache woman approached the fire where he sat alone. Her long black hair moved softly in the desert wind, and her calm eyes studied him with curiosity instead of fear. "My name is Ayanna," she said gently. "Elijah." She sat beside him near the flames. "You are different from most cowboys who pass through these lands," she said. Elijah gave a tired smile. "Maybe I have just been lost longer than most." Ayanna laughed softly at that answer. For hours they talked beside the fire while music and dancing continued around them. She told him stories about her people and the traditions passed down through generations. Elijah shared stories about cattle drives, storms, and the ranch's family lost years earlier during another terrible drought. Ayanna listened carefully. "You still miss them," she said quietly. Elijah stared into the fire. "Every day." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Across the camp, Chief Dakota watched them from a distance. The chief noticed the way Elijah treated people with respect. He saw how the children gathered around the cowboy without fear and how even the elders spoke kindly to him now. But not everyone welcomed Elijah's growing place in the tribe. A warrior named Nantan stood near the edge of camp with anger burning in his eyes. Nantan was strong, proud, and respected among the younger warriors. For years he believed he would one day become Dakota's successor. Now the entire tribe spoke only about the outsider cowboy who had saved the spring. Jealousy slowly hardened inside him. The next evening, Chief Dakota called for a gathering in the center of camp. Torches lit the open space while the tribe formed a large circle around the chief. Elijah stood nearby, unsure why he had been summoned. Then Dakota raised his hand for silence. "Many generations ago," the chief began, "our people created a sacred tradition. When a stranger saves the tribe from destruction, he is welcomed not as a guest, but as family." The crowd listened carefully. Dakota turned toward Elijah. "You brought life back to our people when hope was nearly gone." Then, to Elijah's complete shock, 22 Apache women stepped forward into the firelight. The entire camp became silent. Elijah stared in confusion as the women formed a line before him. Dakota spoke again. "You may choose one woman to marry and remain among our people forever." A wave of whispers spread through the crowd. Some smiled proudly. Others watched Elijah closely, waiting for his answer. Elijah looked at the women standing before him. Then his eyes moved toward Ayanna. He took a slow breath before speaking carefully. "This honor means more than I can explain," he said. "But no woman should be chosen without her own voice." The camp fell silent again. Several warriors looked surprised by his answer. Then something unexpected happened. Chief Dakota smiled. And slowly, the old chief began to laugh with pride. The celebration lasted late into the night, but not everyone in the Apache camp felt peace in their heart. While families laughed near the fires and children carried fresh water from the spring, Nantan stood alone in the darkness beyond the tents. Anger burned inside him stronger than ever. The tribe admired Elijah now. Warriors listened to him. Children followed him through the camp. Even Chief Dakota treated the cowboy with honor. To Nantan, it felt wrong. An outsider had arrived only days earlier, yet somehow he had become more respected than warriors who had spent their whole lives protecting the tribe. Nantan could no longer hide his bitterness. Just after midnight, while most of the camp slept, a sudden scream shattered the silence. "Fire!" Elijah woke instantly. Flames rose near the horse pens at the edge of camp. Horses kicked wildly against their ropes while frightened people rushed from their tents. Warriors grabbed buckets and blankets as smoke spread through the night air. Elijah ran toward the fire without hesitation. Together with several Apache men, he cut loose the terrified horses before the flames could reach them. Children cried as sparks flew through the camp. After several tense minutes, the fire was finally controlled. But before anyone could rest, another voice shouted from the canyon. "The spring!" Fear spread immediately. Elijah and Chief Dakota raced through the darkness toward the sacred spring with several warriors close behind them. When they arrived, Elijah stopped cold. The water flow had slowed to almost nothing. Fresh rocks blocked part of the opening they had cleared only days earlier. Someone had destroyed the channel on purpose. Dakota's face hardened with anger. "This was no accident," the chief said quietly. Elijah knelt near the damaged rocks and examined the ground carefully under the torchlight. Then he saw them. Boot prints. Not moccasins. Cowboy boots. Elijah slowly stood. "Nantan," he said. The warriors exchanged shocked looks. Before sunrise, Dakota led a search party into the hills surrounding the camp. They found Nantan hiding among the rocks overlooking the canyon. At first he refused to speak. But when Dakota confronted him beside the tribe, the truth finally came out. "You care more about that cowboy than your own people." Nantan shouted at the chief. The camp fell silent. Dakota stepped closer. "You nearly destroyed the tribe's only water source." Nantan pointed angrily toward Elijah. "He changes everything. Our people speak his name more than they speak our own traditions." Several warriors lowered their heads sadly. Others looked furious. In Apache tradition, betrayal during a time of hardship carried severe punishment. Dakota's expression became cold. "You endangered innocent lives," the chief said. "You have brought shame upon yourself." But before the chief could continue, Elijah stepped forward. "Wait." Everyone turned toward him. Nantan looked confused. Elijah faced Dakota calmly. "He made a mistake," the cowboy said. "But anger should not decide his future." The tribe murmured in surprise. Dakota studied Elijah carefully. "You would defend the man who tried to destroy your work?" Elijah nodded slowly. "I know what fear can do to a person." He thought he was protecting his people. Nantan stared at Elijah in disbelief. For several long moments, silence filled the camp. Finally, Dakota spoke. "Nantan will leave this camp until he learns wisdom and peace." The warrior lowered his head in shame. Without another word, he turned and walked alone into the desert. As the sun slowly rose above the canyon, Elijah looked toward the damaged spring once more. The water still flowed weakly beneath the rocks. And once again, the tribe would have to fight to protect its future. For the next several days, the Apache tribe worked together to repair the damaged spring once again. This time, Elijah was not treated like an outsider helping the camp. He worked beside them as one of their own. Men carried stones through the canyon while women brought water and food to the workers. Children followed Elijah everywhere, listening to his stories and laughing at his jokes. Slowly, the spring returned stronger than before. Then one evening, dark clouds finally gathered above the desert. Rain began falling across the valley. The tribe stepped outside their tents in silence as cool water touched the dry earth for the first time in months. Soon laughter filled the camp. Children danced through the mud while families lifted their faces toward the sky. Elijah stood beside Ayanna watching the storm. "You brought hope back to our people," she said softly. Elijah shook his head. "No," he replied. "Your people gave me something too." Later that night, Chief Dakota approached him beside the fire. "You still think about leaving," the chief said. Elijah looked around the camp at the smiling faces surrounding him. Then his eyes rested on Ayanna. For the first time in many years, the cowboy finally knew where he belonged. "I think," Elijah said quietly, "I already found my home." Sometimes the people we least expect become the ones who change our lives forever. A lonely cowboy entered the desert searching for water, but in the end, he found something far greater than survival. He found trust, friendship, and a place to finally call home. This story reminds us that kindness can break fear, respect can build peace, and even strangers can become family when they choose compassion over hate. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more powerful emotional stories filled with courage, survival, and unforgettable moments. Comment below. Would you have made the same choice as Elijah and stayed with the tribe? And do not forget to share this story with someone who still believes humanity and kindness can change the world.